Welcome to Ex-Mormon Bible Study, where we study passages of the Bible that directly contradict Mormon doctrines. Today we're in Mark chapter 7 and how it relates to the word of wisdom. In verse 15, Jesus says, "There is nothing from without a man that entering into him can defile him, but the things which come out of him, those are they that defile the man." In the beginning of the chapter, we see that this is in response to the Pharisees asking Jesus and his followers why they don't keep the tradition of the elders, which is to wash their hands and their cups before eating. Jesus instantly calls them hypocrites and says that Esaias, which is the Greek name for Isaiah, had prophesied of these people who honor them with their lips, but their hearts are far from them. He said that these Pharisees were teaching for doctrines the commandments of men, which is their traditions they were teaching as doctrines, and they were laying aside the commandments of God to hold these traditions. So they were ignoring the actual commandments and enforcing their own traditions. He says the same thing in verse 9, "Full well they reject the commandment of God that they may keep their own tradition." So this is why Jesus said that nothing that goes into a man can make him unclean. Even if you don't wash your hands or don't wash your cups, this does not make you unclean. Because these things do not go into your heart. They go into the belly. They go in and they come out. He said that evil comes out of the heart of men. Joseph Smith first taught the word of wisdom in 1833, and as we can see from verse 2, it was originally not a commandment or a constraint. This is evident by the many stories we have of Joseph Smith drinking alcohol, and of course the fact that Brigham Young had handcarts full of tobacco and alcohol tracked all the way to Utah. We also know that Brigham Young had his own distilleries. For the first few decades of the church in Utah, the word of wisdom was either disregarded or heavily debated. In the 1860s, they were taught that coffee, tea, and hot chocolate were all bad for man and not allowed. They also said that hot drinks or hot soups were also not allowed. Then it was later debated that eating pork was a more serious offense to the word of wisdom than drinking tea or coffee. This debate went on until 1921 when the church adopted the word of wisdom and made it a requirement to receive your temple recommend. And this was because they now had scientific medicine. Great, now you have synthetic medicine, so you don't need anything natural. And now the church is ready to accept an exact standard of obedience to the word of wisdom. They fail to mention that this was 1 year after the U.S. government passed prohibitions strictly outlawing alcohol, which most of the church leaders were in support of. However, strictly outlawing alcohol was not an exact standard of the word of wisdom. It was actually contradicting it, because verse 17 says that mild drinks made of grain like barley are good for man. That is beer. Now, to tie it back to Mark chapter 7, we know that the church teaches us that if we drink coffee or tea or alcohol, these things makes us unclean and they defile us, and that no unclean thing can enter the presence of God. That's why if you partake of these things, you are unclean and unworthy to enter the temple. So the word of wisdom as a strict requirement that determines your worthiness to enter the temple is in exact contradiction to the words of Jesus, who said that nothing that goes into your body can defile you. And I love it when Jesus says this here in verse 16, "If a man has ears to hear, let him hear." Are you going to listen to these traditions of man, or are you going to listen to the words of Jesus?